Start with making up some Azilian crimson and French ultramarine for the sky, and then warming it up with a little bit of turquoise. I'm starting with an oil sketch today rather than a pencil sketch. I'm going to make it a bit stronger here, and I'm going to pull it back. I don't want a hard line, so gently pulling it back. And then when it goes over the land, it changes slightly, so I'm going to just let the paint down a little bit, so it's slightly weaker, and go over the hillside, and a little bit more water. Just take the paint up to the horizon. I'm just going to dry the brush. I don't want a dividing line, so I'm just going to take a couple of streaks left and right. And the sand is a lovely, nice warm colour, and it's wet, so I'm going to use yellow ochre and just go up to the first little wave that's rolling in. And then again from the other side. Now, some of the water is green, some of the water is blue. Where it's very shallow, it looks slightly purple. Just get a very, very weak green and turquoise, almost transparent. Just make a few marks to show where the surf is. I've put a few bathers in, but not too many. I think the surf is really, and the changing colour of the water is the main thing in this picture. And I'm just going along here. They're just very, very light, just to show where the white waves are. And I'm letting the paint down a little bit more, just going to the next wave. That gives me my colour changes. I will put a list of the colours used and where they're used in the description, together with hints and tips. I'm going to add a second wash just to brighten the sky. I'm just adding some water where it meets the land and the sea, just to give a softer edge. Just a little bit of water, nothing too much. And then the paint I drop in from higher up will just find its own way down, and then just go from the top letting it skip over the page so the tooth of the paper shows a little bit, give it more variety, and just come down to where the wet line is. So now I can return to the beach, and I've got lots of people, so I just want to put a few dark circles in just to show that there's heads. So I'm going to use some Payne's grey, or any dark that you've got, put something in a little bit brown just to represent wet hair. So I've got one there. It's just a little tiniest of dots, but it'll just help me find the people when I come back to the sea shortly. I haven't got that many people in. I did miss out as many as possible. And then the person standing here, and make the hair slightly lighter. If you've got a dark next to a light, sort of highlights it nicely. I'm just putting that in, and there's some reflection from the person in the water, and I'll just carry on along. I haven't got a line here because there were so many people that you couldn't get a line, but I can make one. So now I'm going to use a little bit of blue where it's reflecting the sky, very weak, and just come forward to the next wave. Water's like a mirror, it reflects what's above. Make it a tiny bit stronger. And I'll come back and put the person's reflection in later in the painting, but I just want to claim space now. And it doesn't matter if it skips across the page slightly. It all adds to the randomness of the waves. Going further back, it starts to become green, so I'm going to add Viridian to the mix, and a little bit again of Naples yellow just to soften it, and do the same with the next wave. Just keep changing the colours slightly. taking the brush sideways so to protect the white foam there around the person, as we haven't got to that stage yet. Just letting the paint down a little bit and changing it more to slightly blue as it goes further away from where I was. The colours change with distance, and there's also a bigger area before the next wave. It's sort of not hitting the beach evenly. So I'm going to add in a little bit more green, changing the colour as I go. I'm putting the green in further forward and leaving the lighter colour at the back. And then there's a dark line here where there's sort of a wave breaking but no surf. So I'm going to put the colour in, and then when it's dry I'll go back and put a darker line in. And where the lady is standing in the water here, it's gone quite yellowy. So I'm just adding some yellow ochre to that, and I'll bring that back slightly into the wave. Just adding a bit of variety. So the colours change by the second, so you just have to have a theme in mind. Well, I've already done the next layer, so I can now proceed to the horizon, which is very, very dark. I'm just going to add a little bit of indigo to the French ultramarine for a very, very dark line. And I'm going to change to a smaller brush to do the horizon because I want to be exact. So I've got a nice number 1. I've got 2 of them. One of them's better than the other. These small brushes need to change regularly. So I'm now going to bring the line in, and it actually flows along the cliff as a dark line. It doesn't just stop at the point. So I'll start over here. Just take it, it's a very dark line on the horizon. Recharge the brush. Going very gently. Then coming the other side of Moore's Rock. And it's actually quite dark in front of it. I've got to make that a wavy line. And then the blue continues halfway down the cliff. So I'm just going to start halfway down the cliff. It doesn't matter where I start. And then just feather it off a little bit so it's disappearing. Now I'm going to go back and add some Viridian to that colour and some more French ultramarine. Dry the brush so it's not too wet, and then go back and add the next colour. I'm going to make some up without the indigo in it just to make it a bit warmer. Using the brush sideways around the people and the little nooks and crannies. And there's a colour change again, it changes completely to green. So I'm now going to go in with a slightly bigger brush and dry it off, make sure it's okay. And then just do a little bit of blending. If you hold the brush at a steeper angle, and coming back it goes to completely green. So what I'm going to do is use Viridian and Naples yellow just to soften it. And I've already put very thin wash on this area so that the white paper doesn't show. I'm going to wet the brush and just feather it off into the corner here, into infinity, because I've got to come back to that. But in the middle I can keep going a little bit, and then it becomes lighter again. Around the swimmers. That's why it was a good idea to put the heads in. You don't miss them then. A little bit more water. On this side it goes more back to blue, so I'm just going to add a little bit of blue to the mix. You see the whole beach is changing colour now. And as I come forward, I'm going to add more Naples yellow because there's more sand being stirred up. It's a different colour entirely. The surf picks up everything. And coming across, the colours of the cliffs are quite remarkable as well, that there's not just brown and grey, sometimes you find purple and green rocks that are showing in the cliffs. So I've got to stop there now and let it dry a little bit, and then put dark areas in where the waves are falling. They can be quite dark. I'm not cleaning my palette because I will come back to some of the colours, but I've just mixed up a sap green and Naples yellow and yellow ochre just a little bit to put the hillside in, and it has got some rocks that are showing through, so I'm going to go round my pencil lines and just put the hillside in. Now the hillside, all the foliage seems to be hanging on to the contour, so I'm doing diagonal strokes, and the very point has got some rock showing, so I'll leave that bare for now. And then moving back, I'm just going to add a little bit of chrome yellow because it's not quite so exposed at further back, and so there's better growth covering the rocks. And there's some old field lines and things showing, so I can put those in a little bit later with a bit of detail. Just basically claiming the shape to start with. Now I can drop some other colours in. I'm going to use a little bit more sap green, and further back here it's slightly more protected and there's some grass trying to grow. But at the front it just seems to be anything that hang on to the cliff. And then further down it's a slightly different colour. At the top, slightly more earthy colour, so I'm going to use more yellow ochre, just put in the top, still going the same direction. It's all wet into wet at the moment, and by doing diagonal strokes with a fairly dry brush gives the contour of the cliff, emphasise this lovely edge. And then coming further back, a little bit more yellow ochre. There's some dark green and I want to show the difference. And the dark green comes all the way in this sort of diamond shape. So I'll do the grass around it and then find a sympathetic tone to do the change of growth. And there's some sandy paths that go into it. So I'm going to use more sap green. The growth comes down to the water's edge and it goes up. It's like sand dunes that are covered in, and rock that are covered in something. So strokes going, fanning out the way that it's formed. Then I'm going to mix a darker green with using sap green, a little bit of indigo, just a tiny bit of indigo, just to give a darker colour. It's causing a little bit of shadow to itself. Just on top, so doing a wavy line, coming round, and it's much darker at the bottom, and then it's just wiping the brush off a fraction, not cleaning it. Just bring the paint down as though it's odd growth over rock and sand, hanging on but not like a lawn. I'm just going along with homemade grey and a little bit of brown, and just sorting out nooks and crannies of the cliff, just putting the paint on alternately, and just making dark areas and just showing where there's shadows, just to give the indication of the cliff. I don't want the cliff to dominate the picture. And then some warmer colours like yellow ochre in from the bottom where it meets the sea, where it's just slightly warmer because it's catching the sun, and it might have a growth of lichen on there. So it just brightens it up. And further back, just a few areas of dark, just to show that it is a well eroded cliff. And then where there's a cavern here, I'll just put the brush sideways to show the difference. And we've got some grass creeping down on the other side of it, just doing the strokes to show the shape of the cliff. And a little bit brighter in some areas, so just adding a little bit of chrome yellow and still going on with the stripes. Now further along, it's slightly more sheltered, so there's a thicker growth of grass. So using a bigger brush, and I'm just going to put that in, still with the same shape, following the cliff. And the field at the top has got several different colours in. And some shadow where it's not level, different levels and shapes, so it's casting its own shadow. And again, just make a slightly dirty brown, that there's a gully down here that's causing a different colour to appear, and one there. I'm now returning to the sea, having put in the cliffs behind it, and I'm just going to feather out the dark lines slightly. The sun's catching it from a slightly different angle, and it's just different current as well, so it's just slightly different. And I'm now going to take the same colour, I haven't cleaned my palette, a number 3 brush, and just put a little bit more blue in, coming forward a little bit. Just to blend it all together. And it looks like the sun's hitting that side a little bit more now. With these things, you can't do it in one stroke, you have to build it up gradually. It's just coming over with a little bit more blue on top of the green, it works well. And then I'm going to take the light line that I made with the flat brush slightly further into the sea, just giving a different join. Just harmonising the two colours. And it just looks like there's a current going through there. I'm now going to put in Mull Island. It's got quite a sheer side one side, and it goes down a little and up to the top, and it's quite jagged. A sideways bit, down and across, and then at the bottom it's quite jagged. So I'm just going to pull the lines back that I've got at the top. And they come through to a point. And I'm going to get a dry brush and just take some of the paint back, because there is an area that's quite yellow from the lichen that's growing on the rock. So that makes it more rounded. As it's such a distance, I'm going to go in with Indian yellow and yellow ochre. But if you haven't got Indian yellow, you could add a little bit of orange. Drop it in, clean and dry the brush, and then move it around a little. Do the same again till you're happy with the degree of paint on something so far away. And when it's dry, I'll put a little bit more paint in the bottom. So I'm now moving back to the cliff and using a slightly bigger brush this time. Let's put some grass down in this ravine. Start from the bottom, just let the paint go up, and the two colours will separate. So that looks like somewhere that is cut out. Now coming forward from that, I've got almost a cliff face meeting the grass, so I'm going to put in the brown first of the cliff face, and then drop the green in on top. So I'm going to dry the brush and go from the top down. Take the paint into the brown. I'm now going to highlight the waves. There's usually a shadow that's quite distinctive, so I've got a number 4 brush which has got a good point, and I'm just going to pick up colours from the palette so that the picture harmonises, and just drop them in underneath. Tickly little edge. And then get a wet brush and just lose the edge of it so that there's a dark piece next to the foam, but the rest is missing, and continue like that, just mixing up tiny little bits of colour, going around the wavy edge. And again, just losing it slightly. And then further back, there's a darker line where briefly the wave breaking has lost the sunlight. So I'm just going to go in again with the same brush, just put a slightly thicker line, and just again lose the edge of that slightly, and then go in with a slightly different colour so it's the wet colours emerging. Keep recharging the brush. And then again another lost line. That's giving it more definition. And I'm going to do that on the next wave back as well, which are quite strong green, a bluey green. So I'm just adding a little bit of blue that I've used already. And just go around the wave. And as it's further away, I'm only doing it once. Now into the middle, they're more lost. It's sort of lost its energy. So I'll just find a few little lines just to put in, not too many. And I'm going to make one of the lines a little bit deeper. It shows more of a powerful wave coming in. In the middle there's nothing because the waves have lost their power, but towards the edge they're bouncing off the cliffs and coming back in again. So slightly bluey green, further away, so different colours. And there's an awful lot going on here, so I'm just going to separate some of it but not all of it. And then put a dark line on top. Because there's so many waves breaking at once, I want to simplify it slightly. Take the paint further out so it's lost. And now in the middle here I've got sandy colour that's being caught up with the waves. So I'm using yellow ochre and just drawing that across. And then water just to lose the edge. The first wave has got quite a dark edge of a nondescript sandy green, so I'm just mixing up yellow ochre, blue and green, and I'm going to go in with the brush at a more acute angle. It doesn't necessarily matter which brush you use, as long as you hold it up the paint will come down to the point. And then the wave over on the other side, it's all happening in blue. It's just the way the light's reflected. Just dropping it in as much as I can, and then water just to soften it. And on the front, on the right, I've got just sand being chucked up, so I'm just using yellow ochre. I'm just putting in a little line, very little, because the wave's nearly used all its energy by then. Going back with the water, just losing it slightly. And the sand's got a lot of reflected light because there's water there, so I'm just adding some blue. Not everywhere, but just every now and again. Spreading it both directions. Now I'll come back to the left hand side, which has got a lot more sand. Brush upright again. And then just move it out with the water. And again, more blue reflected from the wet sand. Just a mirror to the sky. Just where it's losing the sunlight for a second, just put in a slightly thicker line. And this one's at an angle because the wave is just breaking. So I'm going to flatten that out a bit so it doesn't look wrong. So now I've got to put the swimmers in. I think I'll start with the spectator. So obviously anxiously watching somebody in the water. So I'm going to use very, very light burnt umber just to put in arms and neck, and the same with the legs, because they show up where the colour shows up well against everything else that's there. There's no point saying you've got a set colour to use for arms because everybody is different and the circumstances are different. Now the surfboard's further out. They're all wearing black wetsuits, which is handy. So I'm going to use Payne's Grey and just mix it with a little bit of French ultramarine. And you really can't see much of them. It's just a black shape. So I'm just going to go from the neck down. So that's done without too much effort, and I've got one more to find here. The surfboards are mostly white, so that doesn't matter. I'm just going to take a little bit off this person because they're laying on their board and it didn't look quite right. So I'm going to use a dry brush, just take some of it back. Now the spectator, my reference has got black shorts and a red shirt, so I might as well stick with fashion. I put the waistband in and then the join in the legs. Doesn't matter if you don't do all of it, it's just a suggestion. So I'll use a smaller brush and get a little bit more detail. And then join them together. And the t-shirt seems to be one size fits all, it's huge. So I'm just going to pick the first red I find, it doesn't really matter. Go down the back to start with, up to the neck. Then take some of the paint over to the sleeves. When you're happy with the shape, just move the paint a bit more. And use a different red this time and just highlight some of it. And again with the shorts, now that I've got them on, it's a little bit of highlight. So everybody in, apart from the one who's needs a little tint because their head was touching their shoulders. And I just need a reflection of the person now, and it's only the red t-shirt that's reflecting really because of the break in the waves. Reflections aren't always solid. I hope you've enjoyed watching this demonstration of North Cornwall and that you'll go off and explore the area yourselves. Thank you very much for watching.